Hello and welcome back. My name is Dr. Christopher Gennari, and this is Great Big History Podcast. 10 questions. Early settled river valley civilizations. So what was the situation when we left off? When we left off, people were wandering around looking for food, going from place to place, settling for a short period of time, but then moving, following the seasons, following the animals. So people were wandering looking for food. By about 10,000 years ago, people had domesticated several kinds of animals, including pastoral animals. So you had dogs that were domesticated around 23,000 years ago, and they were for protection and for hunting. The dogs got meat, got cooked meat out of it, and humans got companionship, got their ears, got dogs hearing and smell. And so there was a symbiotic relationship, whereas the dogs got protection and humans got the hunting. Around 11,000 years ago, sheep became domesticated. They were mostly for the wool, for warmth, to make clothing out of, and goats 1,000 years or so after the sheep, about 10,000 years ago, and goats were for milk. You milk the goats, and you might drink the milk, but what you really wanted to do was turn it into cheese, which was a portable protein. You turn your milk into cheese, and then you had this portable protein. See, the problem with milk is, what do you put it in? So that you had animal skins, you had stomach linings that you could use as a pouch, but it's in liquid form, it's hard to carry. Cheese, on the other hand, is much easier to carry. Now notice, you don't want to eat any of these. You don't want to eat dogs because they're helping you hunt. You don't want to eat sheep because they're helping produce wool. And you don't want to eat goats because they're creating another food support for you. And once you eat the animal, you can't do anything with it again. So if you're eating dogs and sheep and goats in these early wandering peoples, these early nomadic peoples, things are bad. You know, you're starving. At the moment you start eating, or the goats, I mean, to be fair, when the goats and sheep get too old, then you eat them. But if you're eating your healthy young sheep and goats, or your dogs, your society's in trouble. Because you're getting rid of what is a renewable resource. What people started to do was plant seeds. They threw seeds. You eat an apple, you get the seeds, they throw them. And what people were finding, this is all thought, none of this is history because none of this is written down, but what people were finding was things were growing in the places that they deposited their seeds before. And there's a thought that this is mostly women, because the women were doing the gathering, and the women were hands-on with the fruits and the vegetables and the plants, so they would have more contact with seeds that they would then scatter and throw away. And what they're finding is that things are growing. And so that you get this crossover period where people are beginning to grow things but not invest a lot of energy into it. They're also gatherers, they're also herders, they're still doing hunting, and there's a couple thousand years where all of these things are going on. What eventually happens is that you have to pick, you have to invest. You can't keep doing these multiple things because the energy from one thing is taken away from the energy from the other. So it's like being average at a lot of things. That's not bad, but it means you're not great at anything. And so we have to ask the question, why do people start to farm land? Why do they invest so much energy in farming? It's way more energy than being a nomad. It's way harder. And nomadic life is not easy. We talked about that. But on a day-to-day exertion of calories, nomadic life is easier than the toil of early farming, especially early farming without major tools, much less domesticated animals that can help provide power. So why? Well, the answer is food. The answer is food security. That growing food, despite being harder work, turns out to be much more productive per acre. The numbers you see is 100 times. I don't know if it's 100 times, like literally 100 times, or if that's just a large number that they're like, oh, it's so much more food. But take a look at our picture of our corn. If you're on the video, you see wild corn, and it's this thin little stalk. For those of you who are just on the podcast, it's this thin little gray stalk, brown, grayish, bluish stalk. It's not very attractive looking. But corn. It's this big, round thing that, like, kids can't even get their mouths around. You slather it in butter. The kernels are just huge. That's cultivated. That's domesticated corn. They're completely different things. So not only food per acre, but food per plant becomes much bigger. In 15 to 20 acres, you had enough food for a year for your family. For you, your wife, your kids, your parents, and a little extra. Not a lot, but some surplus. And that surplus becomes savings. It becomes this protection if you have a bad year. If you have a year where you don't have enough food. You have a drought. You have locusts. So you get some protection. You can dip into your savings. Or it's generational wealth. You leave it to the next generation. You leave it to your kids so that they inherit the land, but also some of that surplus. You can take that surplus and sell it, or you can store it to use later, or to sell it for money, and we don't have money yet, but to sell it for something else of higher value that makes your life a little better. So we start to get trade, because some people are going to have things that other people want, whether it's individually or as a society. So what kind of social system do settled peoples use? Individualism. Individualism replaces communism. Remember in Nomads, we talk about communism where everybody is participating, everyone is donating, no one owns anything. Well, now we get a system of individualism, not individuality. Yet people are not yet I, but they're my. It's my land. It's my work. It's private food. What I grow is mine. When I sell my extra food, it's my wealth. I don't have to share it with anyone. When I buy something, it's my possession. So you get this, just by settling down, we break those bonds of we. We break those communist bonds of everyone donates. Because individuals are now getting wealthier. Individuals now, there is no libertarians in the ancient world. They're never going to be like, I am totally self-reliant. There's no way, because we're going to talk about that in a second. But the idea is that they're more independent and less dependent on other people's labor than they were before. Now, that will change as well when we get into things like slavery and war captives and things like that. But the idea is it's my. The word my starts to enter people's languages in a way it doesn't for nomads, where our, is the language of nomads. Settled people, the pronoun for settled people is my. I don't know if my is a pronoun. It's a possessive noun. But it's my, me. But there's still problems. So you're not an independent, because there's problems of nomads. If you're settled on 15 acres of land, you're never going to leave those 15 acres of land year after year after year, which means nomads know where you are. If you ever watched Bug's Life, Pixar's movie A Bug's Life, the locusts come back every year. Why don't the ants just leave? Well, they can't. Where are they going to go? They're not nomads. That's their land. That's their valley. So the locusts know where they are. The second is nature. You need nature to work for you. And we'll work about that. We'll talk about that. You need it to the sun to shine, but not too much. You need the rivers to flood, but not too much. You need the locusts to clear out the fields, but not too much. Then there's the problem of other settled people. Those people up the river. Those people down the river. The people who are your neighbors. People who live in town. So those are all problems, which means you need to contribute to help others so they contribute to help me. So there is no libertarianism. There's no concept of the self as separate from others. There's no, I can do it all. I'm on my own. I don't need you. You still need people. You need people for protection from nomads. You need people to help you when nature doesn't go your way. And you need people for when things go bad and you have to rely on either neighbors or you have to rely on neighbors to help you with other neighbors. So there is no such thing as libertarianism in the ancient world. Just like there is no atheism. Everybody is reliant on others. So there's no concept of an independence from others. So while we have individualism, we don't so much have an individuality, a libertarianism in the ancient world, in this period. So, okay, we talked about problems. So what's the settled people's solution to the problem of nomads? Well, we've kind of already talked about that. It's walls. Horses can't climb walls, and nomadic peoples who are on horses are not going to get off their horses. That would give away their advantage. So what you do is you put most of your important stuff behind those walls. Those walls will either be squared or circled. You can't do all 15 acres of everybody's farms. There's not enough stone. There's not enough money. There's not enough talent. There's not enough time. So settled people from the very beginning have to decide what's important and what's not. What can we leave for the nomads? And what do we want to protect from the nomads? Well, first is people. Right? So there has to be enough space so that in a crisis, not every day, but in a crisis, everybody can flood into the city. Everyone could flood into the walls. We're not out of the city yet. So, but they can't stay there permanently. They have to go back to their farms. They have to go back to their work. It's their land. And nomads don't want land. Nomads, when they show up, are looking for food, mostly, and maybe they'll kidnap some people, some women, some children for future wives, future labor. Right? They need people. So nomads are going to come. They're going to run around the city for a while. They're going to steal your goats. They're going to steal your pigs. They're going to steal some of your sheep. And then they're going to leave. They don't need money. They only need the food that he can carry on a horse, right? So then they'll leave. So you kind of wait it out. But you have to decide what buildings go into those walls, in that space in that walls. What do you want to protect from the nomads destroying? And so you get the inadvertent creation of cities, because the stuff that goes into the middle of those walls are going to be your palaces, your temples, your merchants. They're going to be the government. They're going to be the gods. They're going to be the money. And so what this does is separate the urban rich who do not farm. Whatever job they have, the people who live in the city, they're not farmers. From the rural poor who do farm. And so, from the very beginning, cities are rich. Cities are where money is made. The kind of post-1970s deindustrialization idea that Camden exists, a poor city, is not an ancient, it does not exist in the ancient world. Cities are wealthy. They have people, they have trade, they have the temples, they have money, they have education. It's the people who are working in the fields. Those are the poor people, the farmers, the subsistence level farmers. Because remember, at this point, you don't have the tools to work 100 acres, 500 acres, 10,000 acres like you could do today. So you worked back-breaking labor to get just enough to feed yourself and a little extra. So what's the solution to the problem of nature? Well, people need nature to work for them. See, if you're nomadic, you don't need nature to work for you. You need nature to work with you. You need the help of nature. You need nature to provide deer to eat. You need nature to provide water, clean water to drink. Right? So the religions of nomadic peoples are very spirit-orientated. They're very interactive. They're spirits of the forest, the spirits of the mountain. Your ancestors come with you. You don't bury your ancestors and forget them. They are in nature. It's very Moana, right? Moana's grandmother dies, becomes a sea ray, and helps her on her journey to get past the breakers to go and save the island. Right? That's a spirit. That's the spirit of your ancestors helping you in a natural nature form, right? The manta ray, the sea ray. Settled people are different. Settled people rely on nature to work. The sun has to shine, but not too much. The river has to flood, but not too much. The insects have to eat, but not too much. If it's too much of any of those things, you have disaster. You have too much sunshine is drought. Too much flooding is inundation. It's Noah, right? It's Katrina. Right? You need it to rain, but not too much. You need the insects. The insects, lots of things eat the insects. The insects poop. That's fertilizer. But if they eat everything, if they eat all the roots, you're left with nothing that you can use. And is not being reliant on nature. It's that you can't control it. People cannot make the sun shine. They cannot make it rain. As much as we try, we still can't. 10,000 years later, we still can't control nature. President Donald Trump thought, what if we set off a nuclear device in a hurricane? What if we blew up a nuclear bomb in a hurricane? Can we stop the hurricane? And people laughed at that and said, that's so dumb. But it comes, credit where it's due. It comes from the very basic concept of, I want to try to control nature. And a hurricane, a Category 5 hurricane, hitting Florida is bad. It's bad for people. It's bad for everyone. So can't we just control it? Can't we just make it not be a hurricane? That is a very ancient desire. And the problem is that no matter what humans do, they can't. The forces are too big. So what ancient peoples do is have polytheism. They have gods. And the gods control an aspect of nature. There's a god of the sun. There's a god of the river. There's a god of rain. There's a god of the insects. There's a god of every aspect of human life that you're relying upon. There's a fertility god to help you get pregnant, and for the Romans, there's a birth god to help you give birth. They're very specialized. Different religions have different levels of specificity, but it's polytheism. These are human gods. They're not always drawn as humans, but they're always humans who specialize in one aspect of nature, and their humanness is very important. It's like Thor in the Avengers movies. You have Helmsworth, you have Chris Helmsworth. What can you do? You can talk to him. You can negotiate with him. You can beg, plead, say you're sorry, thank him. And you can understand Thor. Why? Because while he's powerful, while he's never going to die, he's also a person who wants person stuff. He just wants more of it than regular people because he's a super person. And so what is the advantage of this? What is the advantage of settled people's solution to the problem of nature? And the advantage is, as we just said, you can understand these gods. You can make a contract. I will do for you, and you will do for me. I will give you a sacrifice. I will burn 3 goats, and you make it rain. And the god says, cool, burn 3 goats, and I'll make it rain. So you can have an understanding. This is a little bit, just a little bit of control over nature. 2, you get community. Everybody participates. It rains on everybody. So everybody must sacrifice. So what do? We have parties. We have celebrations. Since everyone's doing it, we make it a community. You don't do it alone. It's your birthday. It's Easter. It's Christmas if you're Christian. Hanukkah if you're Jewish. It's the Festival of Lights if you're Hindu. It's the end of Ramadan if you're Muslim. You don't do this alone. You do this as a group. And so it brings the community together. And 3, you gain protection. By having multiple gods, one of them has to like you. Right? The god of the river might not like you very much. But the sun god will. And so you gain protection. We see this in Odysseus. We see this in Homer, right? Poseidon wants to kill Odysseus for blinding his son, the Cyclops. But Athena is like, no. You're not going to kill him. He's under my protection. I love Odysseus. And so you get this kind of game where Poseidon's like, well, he's on the ocean. I'm the god of the ocean. I'm going to drown him. And Athena's like, that's great, but I'm going to send a dolphin to pick him up, to keep him from drowning. And he's like, Poseidon's like, well, I'm going to send a shark to eat the dolphin. And Athena's like, great, I'll send an eagle to pick Odysseus up before the shark can eat him. We can do this all day. And so Odysseus survives because he has a god on his side. Even though a different god, hates him. What is the disadvantage of this? What's the disadvantage of polytheism? What's the disadvantage of settled people's solution to the problem of nature? Sacrifice is expensive. It's called a sacrifice for a reason. 3 goats is expensive. And you're not in charge of that. The priests are reading the signs. They're reading the documents. They come out and they proclaim it. And you're like, you have to do it. If you don't have 3 goats, that means you have to buy 3 goats. That means you have to dip into your savings. What if you don't have a lot of savings? What if your savings was supposed to go to your daughter's wedding? You're her dowry. You were setting her up. Now she can't marry the person she wanted to marry. Because now you don't have enough. You're going to have to dip into that. Sacrifice is expensive. 2 is the gods are human. Now that's an advantage because you can negotiate with them and they do good human things. But humans are also selfish. They're lazy. They lie. They cheat. Which means the gods do that too. 3, everyone must participate. Whether you want to or not. Oh, you're not going to burn your goats? Your neighbor's watching you. Your neighbor's going to knock on the door. Hey, I see you're not burning your goats yet. Do you need any help with that? I got some firewood. I got a little altar we can, combine. No. No, I'm fine. Later in the day, hey, it's your neighbor and your block, all the neighbors down the street, wondering why you aren't burning your goats yet. We need it to rain. Oh, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Later, hey, it's your neighbor and all the block and the priests and some other people from down the road who are really kind of concerned you haven't burned your goats yet. So we're just gonna come in. Thanks for having us. We're gonna drink your Cokes and we're gonna eat your chips. And here, we brought 3 goats. Don't worry, your credit is good at the goat guy. You pay him back later, and we're gonna sacrifice anyway. We're gonna make sure you get it done. You don't have privacy. So we have individualism, but we don't have privacy. That goes along with it. Everybody must participate, whether you want to or not. You are part of the community, whether you want to be or not. And fourth is exactly the opposite of Odysseus. And Athena's relationship is Odysseus's and Poseidon's relationship. Having multiple gods means one of them likely hates you. One of them dislikes you. One of them has it out for you and wants to hurt you. And even if they don't, even if somehow you're so bland that you've never, you're like vanilla yogurt, but without the fruit in it, or any of the honey, or any of the chocolate, like you're just plain yogurt. You're not even vanilla yogurt. You're just plain yogurt. And you're getting by, and none of the gods notice you, right? You still have gods that are death gods, that are trickster gods, that are evil gods, gods that just like to do evil. You think plain vanilla granola you is going to avoid those gods? You're exactly who they're going to pick on because you have no other gods who like you. Going to help you, right? So you better have some god on your side. So what is the settled people's solution to the problem of problems? See, all right, we're going to build walls. How? Where are we going to get the money? Who's going to build it? You can't just get a farmer to build a wall. Why? Because if they're building the wall, they're not farming, which means their crop yield is not going to be good. That means they're going to have less food, which means they're going to get poorer, even though the society is helped by building the wall. This is a concept called the problem of the commons, where society, the group, needs a thing, but it's in no one's interest. There's no incentive for anyone to provide that thing because it takes away from their individual abilities. So if I don't farm, I don't make money, which means I get poorer. But if nobody builds the walls, then nomads come and kill everybody. So everybody's waiting for somebody else to do it, which means it never gets done. So we have this problem of how to solve the problems. Sacrificing. And the priests. Who's going to pay the priests? We need the priests to tell the people what the gods want. I don't have time. I'm a farmer. I don't have time to read the signs, to read the old books, to read the stories. I don't have time for all that. I need someone to just say, burn 3 goats. And I say, yes, got it. The answer is kings. Kings, the Burger King. Who's a king? A king is a super rich guy who has legitimacy. He has the legitimacy to make poor people pay taxes, to pay poor people to build stuff, not to farm, right? They want to farm. They're farmers. He has the legitimacy to make poor people stop farming and build stuff. He has the legitimacy to make other rich people obey his rules. And rich people don't like obeying people's rules. That's where libertarian comes libertarianism comes from. It's the idea that I am rich enough, I don't need anybody else. So rich people don't like being told what to do. They've never liked being told what to do. So what they need is someone who's as rich as them, who has the ability to tell them what to do. You need a king, a super rich guy, to have the legitimacy to get the priests and the gods to support him. Notice I use him. So what is legitimacy? So let's talk about legitimacy for a second, because this is going to be a big word in this class. Legitimacy is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. Let's go through that again. It is the ability to get other people. It is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. It is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. Your parents, when you're a little kid, have legitimacy. They say go to bed, you go to bed. They say wear this t-shirt, you wear that t-shirt. You say you got to wear a suit. It's grandma, we're going to a wedding. You go, okay. Here, we're going to have, this is what you're going to eat. That's what you eat. This is what your school book's going to be. That's what your school book's going to be. Teachers have legitimacy, right? Tell you when to sit, when to go to the bathroom, what to do, what to write down. Right? Your friends may have legitimacy. Hey, come on over. You come on over. You don't say, why don't you come over here? Right? That's a fight of legitimacy. They say, come on over. You go on over. They have the legitimacy to say, I'm not leaving my house. You come to me, and you come. So legitimacy is the ability to get other people to accept your right to tell them what to do. And so some super rich guy has to fight other super rich guys in like gang warfare, like Tupac versus Biggie, in order to be powerful enough to tell even other rich people what to do. And once you could tell other rich people what to do, you could go to the poor people and tell them what to do. And people accept it. They say, all right, I'll pay my taxes. All right, I'll follow your rules. All right, I'll do your thing. Why? Why am I going to do that? Because you're the king. That's why. Why do you bow to the queen? Because you bow to the queen. That's why you do it. She can make you bow. You don't want to bow? You can't be in the presence of the queen. And you may say, well, I don't want to be in the presence of the queen. Yeah, well, you don't get any of her favors either. And when the queen or the king is the richest person around, they have a lot of favors they need and a lot of ability to hand out favors. You have a problem with your neighbor because their tree keeps dumping all of its leaves on your side of the fence. You know who could fix that? The king can fix that. The king can fix that in a whole bunch of different ways. So you bow to the king. And he says, how can I help you? And you say, my neighbor has the worst tree, and I've tried to work it out with him, and he won't budge. And the king says, I'll take care of that. And then it's taken care of. Maybe the tree is cut down. Maybe your neighbor disappears. Maybe you are given the land. Anything can happen. So kings in this early period, though, are not institutional. They become institutional, but they're like the Godfather. They have power because they can exert power. They have legitimacy because they've won it and people accept it. So now we have to ask the question later on in this class. This class is a lot of how do you get legitimacy and then how do you keep it? We're going to see this over and over and over again. Because if you remember the protests after the murder of George Floyd, you know what happens when the police lose legitimacy. Right? The police have legitimacy. They can pull you over. They can give you a ticket. Then they do things like murder George Floyd, and people say, yeah, I don't have legitimacy anymore. And they protest the very, like, defund the police, the very idea that the police get as much social support, as much taxation as they do in many communities. Whenever you lose legitimacy, it's always a problem. It's always a mess. It's never good. There's always a fight. And if you were ever a teenager, you know this, because when you were a teenager, you went from when you were 9, 10, maybe 11, and your parents got to tell you what to do, and then you're 15, and you don't want to listen to your parents anymore. And what do they have to do? They have to ground you, right? They have to put up Ring video lights so that you can't sneak out. They have to spend an enormous amount of energy to keep you from having sex with the people they don't want you to have sex with, from doing drugs that they don't want you to do. Right? You say, well, what drugs can you do? Well, there's Tylenol, right? There's pharmaceuticals. That's what the doctor gives you, right? The doctor has legitimacy to give you drugs. Right? Meth is bad, but speed, quote unquote, diet medicine from your doctor, totally cool, right? And we could go, well, why is that? Well, that's legitimacy. We have a system that made one thing legitimate, right? It made morphine legitimate and made heroin illegal, right? Not legitimate. And who gets to determine that? Well, the society did. And the society said doctors get to make that decision. And there you go. What if you have no kings? What if you just say either one guy, one super rich guy keeps fighting over and over and over again with the other rich, no one guy wins? Or the society says, we don't need him. We don't want him. We don't want a king. We're libertarians. We don't need a government. I'm on my own. Well, no taxes, right? The king can't enforce the taxes, which means he can't collect the money to pay farmers not to farm, which means no walls get built. If no walls get built, sooner or later the nomads come and destroy you, and you don't get talked about in History 101 in my class because you don't exist. You didn't leave anything behind. But you got, right before you got shot in an arrow in the face, you got to say, at least you got to say, I'm a libertarian. Government won't oppress me. And then the nomad laughed at you and shot you in the face with an arrow. Congratulations. So, no taxes means no army, which means other settled people will sooner or later come and take your land. So, all right, you build your walls, right? Even if you build your walls, you get everybody to pitch in. You don't have a king. Everyone's going to do potluck. They're all going to help build a little wall just to keep the nomads out. Great. Well, who's going to come sooner or later? The city from up the river is going to come down with a group of 5,000 people, and they're going to knock that wall down. And they're going to kill you and take your stuff. And then they're going to take your land. And why are they going to do that? Because they need your land for farming to feed their people, because their population is increasing. So you need an army to fight other settled peoples. And finally, rich people just keep on fighting until the nomads or nature or neighbors end it. So you don't get talked about in 101. You are not successful without kings. There is no society we talk about that does not have an established form of government. Not one. The nomads have it. The nomads have a chief. They don't exactly have a good succession plan, but the Roman Empire didn't either. But they had a government, and that government had legitimacy. The chief had legitimacy until the chief didn't have legitimacy, and then either the chief died in battle or was murdered by his own people, and then a new chief becomes chief. So what happens in Mesopotamia? Now, I put up on the video a map of the world so that you have an idea of where Mesopotamia is. It's in what we call the Middle East. It's the middle of the Middle East. It's southeast of Turkey. It's north of Arabia. It's west of India and east of the Mediterranean Sea in Europe, and southern Europe, I should say. So what happens? Because so far we've been talking about everybody. Every settled people settle in kind of the same way. It's kind of the beginning of Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. It's all happy people are happy, all happy families are happy in the same way. Well, all settled people begin to settle in the same way. So what happens in Mesopotamia, which is where we're going to spend the next 5 weeks, the next 10 episodes? Well, we have success. Small towns survive and become cities of about 5,000 people. With more success, those populations grow. With better farming, more food, more land, and you get large cities. These are rarer. There's and Uruk. Is U-R, and Uruk is U-R-E-K. These are about 25,000. Most small towns are 5,000 people. 5,000 is like a college town. Everybody kind of knows each other. They may not know each other well, but they, at the pub, you're having a beer and somebody walks in and you're like, hey, you give them a little nod of the chin. You're like, I know you. You don't know his name. You don't know who his family is, but I've seen you around. That's 5,000 people. 25,000 people, you don't really know people anymore. It's a big suburb. You could go to the Wawa and see people you know, but you could also go to the Wawa and see people you've never seen before. Living on a side of town you don't go to. That's that's Uruk, and that's success. People moved from Sumer. Sumer is the bottom of Mesopotamia, and they begin to move upriver. So they're moving up the rivers, the Tigris in the north, the Euphrates in the south. The Euphrates is the more important of the two. Tigris is Tigris, and Euphrates, we'll talk about later, is Euphrates, Euphrates. And you start moving up those rivers. You go where it's a frontier. You're looking for new land. You're looking for less government. While I tell you there's no libertarians, there's also plenty of people who don't like the kings that they live under. They don't like the priests who are telling them what to do. They don't like the taxes. They want to be more independent. And so they want less established government. And so they move into new areas, frontier. They settle down. They take up land. They start farming it. And what happens is you create new settled areas, new towns. That's success equals more growth. You're going to need a king. You're going to have to make a government. And the process continues. And so over a couple of thousand years, people started Sumer, the southern part of Mesopotamia. And in a couple thousand years, they've moved up further and further into a frontier. So Akkad, the middle of the rivers, becomes populous. And the north, which we will eventually call Assyria, because then people will create an empire there called the Assyrians. But that's like the frontier. That's like the west. That's like northern Nevada, Wyoming. It's this place that doesn't have a lot of people, doesn't have a lot of cities, doesn't have a lot of government. It's more dangerous, but there's more opportunity. That brings us to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is the most popular story in Mesopotamia. It shows a common culture that despite moving up those rivers, these people are speaking a language, they're sharing a culture, they're still not literally the same people, but they live in the same cultural world. Like when I go to California, I'm still seeing Americans acting American, talking in American. You go, well, what language is that? It's like, it doesn't matter. It's English, it's Spanish, it's maybe Japanese or Chinese. It's all of these languages, but it's a way of speaking. It's a way of doing things, right? Fast food is McDonald's. It's not something completely different. Like Paris has cafe culture. America has eat in your car, eat a burger in your car. So Mesopotamia as a culture is expanding, and we see this in Gilgamesh. Everybody who's literate is going to read Gilgamesh. It is the first original written down blockbuster story. So what is it about? The first thing is, it's about how a good king should behave. Gilgamesh, when it starts, is a bad dude. He's a young guy who sleeps with too many women. He lies. He cheats. He's not a nice king. And so the first story ever written is written about bad kings and how not to behave. And so the people pray to the gods, and the gods are like, you're right. Gilgamesh may be king, but he's a bad dude. He's definitely a bro. Gilgamesh is a bro. So, right, the first story is a bro story. And so what the gods say is, we're going to make a guy, Enkidu. And he's going to be special. He's going to be better than Gilgamesh. How are we going to make him better than Gilgamesh? We're not going to have him live with all the temptations and all the limitations of a city. We're going to put him outside the city. We're going to raise him outside of civilization. And so the first statement of Gilgamesh is, what are the qualities of a good king? The second statement is more of a question. So the first question is, are cities actually good for people? Gilgamesh seems to suggest not. Like, we live in a city, but it's not very good, because Enkidu is not born in a city. He's not raised in a city. He's raised by the animals outside the city. He's outside of civilization, and this is seen as better. And this blows my mind, because we're going to talk about this throughout all of history. We're going to talk about how people don't like cities, despite living in them. Right? As Americans, we live in suburbs. We don't really want to live in a city. Right? But so what did we create? We don't want to live in the rural area either. We kind of created this middle space where I have a little bit of land. It's mine, but I can't do anything with it. I can't farm my 1/8 of an acre, 1/10 of an acre. Right? I could have a garden. All right, I make tomatoes. Whoopie-doo. Right? Costco is quaking in its boots to my tomatoes. Right? You can't do anything with your backyard. It's too small. But we don't want to live in a city either. So the very first story is, maybe cities aren't good for people. Maybe civilization isn't good. Maybe it's civilization that makes people bad. That's Freud in the 20th century writing Civilization and its Discontents. So this is an idea for as long as there's been cities, there's been people going, maybe we should go back to being nomads. Maybe urban life isn't good for people. And the third part of Gilgamesh is, why do we die? And can we live forever? How do we live forever? Why? Well, Enkidu comes to the city. He eventually comes to the city. And he meets Gilgamesh, and he's better than Gilgamesh. He's kind of like, Gilgamesh, you stink. You're a bad guy. And Gilgamesh gets upset at this. And Gilgamesh is like, I'm the king. Who are you? And so they wrestle. They have a fight. They get into a fight. In public. And Enkidu wins. Which, of course, makes Gilgamesh go, oh my God, maybe I am bad. Maybe the gods don't like me. Maybe the gods aren't on my side. How did I lose? And so Gilgamesh decides he's going to change. He's going to become a better king. But he also knows Enkidu is his best friend. And why is Enkidu his best friend? Because they're the only two who are better than everybody else. They're clearly better than everybody else. They're touched by the gods, right? Enkidu is made by the gods. Gilgamesh is king. Obviously, the gods made him king. So they become homeboys. They become bros. And they go on adventures together. Why? Because nobody else can understand Gilgamesh except for Enkidu. And nobody can understand Enkidu except for Gilgamesh. So, is there a bit of homoeroticism? Perhaps homosexuality in the... Well, it's not homosexuality. It may be bisexuality in the oldest of old stories. Yeah. Gilgamesh and Enkidu go to the land of the cedars. That's Lebanon. That's a ways. That's Phoenicia. That's Lebanon. From Sumer. That is up the rivers and down the coast. That's 800 miles. That's a long way away. What's two young men in the prime of their lives going to do when they're in a tent by themselves in the dark of night? Who knows? We don't know. But Gilgamesh loves Enkidu, and Enkidu loves Gilgamesh in a way that they do not love other women. So this tells us about love as well in the ancient world, that it's not the same as sex. It can be, but it's not. There can be sex involved in love, but there also can be an intellectual set concept of love that's separate from sex. And so when Enkidu dies, and there's a giant flood that kills everybody, Gilgamesh has survivor's guilt. Gilgamesh survives. And he's got PTSD. He's got survivor's guilt. How? Why? Why should I live and Enkidu die? Enkidu is better than me. Enkidu is closer to the gods than me. Why is he dead? And so the oldest story, the most popular story humans have ever written down, that we know that humans have ever written down, has what's the nature of government? Are cities good for people? And why did I live when my friends died? And so what he does is go in search of immortality, a way of not dying, because dying sucks. I'm never going to die. And he meets a guy whose name I cannot pronounce, so I'm not going to try it. But the Hebrews, 1,000, 2,000 years later, are going to turn him into Noah. But he meets a guy who says, well, I live forever. And he goes, how do you live forever? Well, I eat this special plant, and I'm touched by the gods. And let me tell you, living forever ain't all it's cracked up to be. And Gilgamesh goes, well, I want to try. And so the old man says, well, go one night without any sleep. Let's start easy, because living forever is a long time. Just go one night without sleep. And Gilgamesh, from the long journey, from his PTSD, from his survivor's guilt, from the anxiety he's living with every day, falls asleep. And the old man goes, see, how are you going to live forever if you can't make it through one day? So Gilgamesh has failed at trying to live forever. But now, what's the meaning of life? Like, then why do I live? And the answer Gilgamesh comes up with is, the point of life is to be remembered. You live forever by being remembered by your great deeds. He's Gilgamesh, king of kings. So he wrestled the beast. He went to the land of the cedars. He defeated the witch in the wardrobe. I don't know. There's a whole adventure saga of him and Enkidu getting into adventures. And Enkidu will be remembered because he was the homeboy of Gilgamesh, right? And people will remember because Gilgamesh does great things. And if you think that's history, that's Alexander, that's Caesar, that's most people are not names in history. They're just people. But certain people were put in a certain place and accomplished certain deeds that we wrote down and said, oh, we have to remember this. And we've remembered it. But that's not most people. That's not 99.9% of people. So how do they live forever? And the answer is children. Children are the way you live forever. How? Well, you have children, you have grandchildren, you tell stories. They know you exist. They know you did exist. Maybe if you're literate, you could write down a diary, or you keep a blog, and that will be your words. But the idea is that you have children who will miss you when you're gone. And then they will tell their children about you. And then your grandchildren will tell stories about you to their grandchildren. Grandfather. My mother's father was a guard at Nuremberg. My mother's father spoke naturally, natively spoke German and Hungarian. Because his parents were immigrants before the First World War, he spoke those languages. So he was useful at Nuremberg. So I will tell my children when they're like, oh, Dad, did you hear about this thing called Nuremberg? I'm like, yes. And you know what? My grandfather, your great-grandfather, grandma's father was a guard there. And then what will happen is my grandfather has long passed away. My mother will pass away. I will pass away, right? But my children will tell their children. When their children are like, oh, there's this World War II and it ends in Nuremberg, and my children will say, you know what your great-grandpappy did? What your great-great-grandpappy did? He was a guard there. He was helping the Allies. He spoke German. He spoke Hungarian. Right? And so you continue to live on in the stories, and that gives you your immortality. So here's the first story that has been written down, that we know of, that was super popular. And look at the big, big questions it's asking that we still grapple with. We're still writing stories about this. Are cities actually good for people? Well, that's Emily in Paris, right? That's White Lotus. That's all the politics. If you watched the political ads, it's those urban liberal elites, right? The answer is no. Cities are bad. The farmers are good people. Rural America is good, right? That's what they're saying. It's still an argument. 5,000 years later, we're still at, and of course you have, why do we die? What's the nature of life? How do we live forever? Right? Google has a little company that's trying to figure out how people live forever. Right? There are companies right now. The old story about Walt Disney being frozen, or Ted Williams being frozen so they could come back to life later. Right? Walt Disney was not frozen. So the idea is like, death sucks. Why do we have to do it? So the first story has these huge questions. And these are questions we're going to talk about again and again and again, because different people are going to have different answers that try to help them sleep at night, that they try to figure out, how does the world work? Okay. So thank you. Take care and be safe.